Welcome to the second video on efficiency. In this video, we'll be talking about producer surplus. How do we measure the well-being, the benefits that producers get from the market? And I usually find this one is a tiny bit less intuitive for students. It's less easy for you to grasp because, again, most of us aren't used to acting as producers. So we'll think about this a little bit gradually. We'll think about this from the perspective of somebody who is in that market for Ararat shoes, but is not Adidas. They're flipping the shoes, so they're closer to us all as consumers. They bought them at one time, now they're trying to resell them for more. And then we'll kind of apply it more broadly. So producer surplus is all about how much does the market benefit producers? Do firms profit more from certain transactions? Are some sellers more profitable than others, etc.? So I looked up this data on Adidas's profit, and it turns out that their profit per shoe is actually very low. So out of every $100 they make on shoes, 21 of it is from the cost of the inputs, the labor, materials, factory space, etc. And then there's the transaction costs, right? The shipping, freight, insurance, and customs. The marketing, what they pay to celebrities, and then what they pay to have things show up in our feeds. Other expenses and overheads, I'm not sure exactly what this is. Could be like the salary of people at the top, just the other category. And then a big chunk of it is the margin that retailers make. So they're only selling it to the retailers for about $50. And so out of that 50, they pay $1 in income taxes and make $2 in net profit. And that's kind of the way we're going to think about producer surplus right now. So some ways that they could make the transaction more profitable for them are if they reduce the cost to produce the sneaker, right? If they were able to reduce their overhead, if they reduce the margin that retailers were making, all of that would make the yellow get bigger and make their profit per shoe grow. So we're going to think about Adidas at the end, but for now, we're going to think about the person who bought the Ararat and is now trying to flip it. And this is a whole pretty large marketplace of sneakerheads and sneaker investors that we might have a few in our class. Look forward to hearing about it. I've definitely had students in the past. So producer surplus, PS, is the market price minus what the producer would be willing to sell the good for. And this willingness to sell is usually very related to their cost. Could be their cost of producing it themselves. It could be their opportunity cost, which think about if you are somebody who just bought a pair of those shoes, your opportunity cost of selling it is probably the enjoyment you'd get from keeping it for yourself, or the probability that it goes up in price and you could sell it for more in another month. So you can think about that as production cost for a seller that is selling something they made themselves, or the opportunity cost in terms of the value of holding onto it themselves. So we're going to abbreviate this P star, market price, minus willingness to sell, WTS. So graphically, we'll think of this as the area below the price and above the supply curve. And I want you to pause and think about how can you remember this intuitively? So this is, again, a bunch of jargon and abbreviations. How are you going to think about producer surplus in a way that makes it stick for you? So just pause and think about a short, catchy definition that's going to help you remember this. And I'll share the best ones of those together with you in class. So I think of this as how much profit do firms make when they sell a good above cost. I also think of this as like, how excited is an individual to sell a good for more than their opportunity cost? You could also think of it as like firm's markup or profit. All of those we're going to use pretty interchangeably at this point. So producer surplus, that's where we are. We're measuring how much benefit firms get from transactions. Okay. So let's think of these individuals who are trying to flip their Yeezy Foam Runner Ararats. So they bought it themselves, maybe to wear themselves, probably just as an investment or arbitrage, buying low, selling high. And now they're going to be the producers in our model. So let's say again that there are only 4 different producers. The first producer is willing to sell their pair of Arorats. We're assuming the product is all identical. So these are all shoes that are in equally good shape. And the sellers have like relatively similar shipping costs and all of that. But the first producer is willing to sell for the least. They have the lowest opportunity cost. Maybe they are a Taylor Swift fan, so they really hate these shoes. Or maybe they just are clueless and don't know that these shoes are valuable. They found them on the street, and maybe they think that they're some kind of elaborate cup or razor. I can't figure out what these shoes look like a koozie. Like, this is a weird koozie. It doesn't hold beer very well. I'm going to sell it, but I'm going to sell it for $50. And then the next seller is willing to sell for a little bit more. They have a little bit higher cost. Maybe they really love the shoe, but they need the money for rent. So their willingness to sell is relatively low, but not as low as the first one. Maybe the third producer who's willing to sell it for quite a bit more. They love the shoe, but their feet grew. Maybe they just had a baby and their feet stretched out. So they would need to be offered quite a bit more in order to sell them because they have a lot of nostalgia attached to the shoe. Maybe they wore the shoe on their first date. I don't know. And then the fourth person is willing to sell them for $2,000. Maybe this person is incredibly sentimental, or this is like the pair that completed their Kanye shoe collection. Maybe this person really believes that the value of the shoe is going to go way up when Kanye gets elected as president. But whatever it is, this person would need to be offered at least $2,000 to sell the shoes. So we can line all these people up on our supply curve. So we're thinking about the Ararat market and their price still. And we've got a supply curve. The first seller is down here, $50. The second seller is here at $200. They will come into the market if the price rises above that. The third seller is here at $600. And then we're going to need to stretch our axis a little bit to show this fourth person who's very, very attached to the shoe and only willing to sell them for $2,000. Very high opportunity cost seller who really wants to hold on to the shoes themselves. That's what our supply curve looks like. And again, you can think of it as being linear. So again, in order to say something about producer surplus, producer well-being, we need to know something about price. Let's say the price is $250, just like it was in the demand example. And in that case, only the people to the left, again, are in the market. So only sellers 1 and 2 will wind up selling their shoes, and these ones are not in the market. We don't force the third and fourth seller to supply the shoes if the price is less than they'd be willing to sell for. So think back to the orange game. If when you were a seller, you had a cost of oranges, and you were trying to sell to buyers who had the highest bid, you wanted the price to be as high as possible. Your producer surplus, or the profit or the earnings you got in the game as a seller, were that price minus your cost of supplying the oranges. And so to calculate the producer surplus of the first seller, we can see it visually on the graph right here. It's what they're willing to sell it for, that $50. The price up here minus what they would have sold it for their cost of hanging on to it. So it's $250 minus $50, $200 of producer surplus for the first seller. For the second seller, it's $250 minus $200, $50 worth of producer surplus. For this seller, it is not negative $350 because we do not force them to sell the shoe. So they just opt out and take a zero, opt out and take a zero. So the total producer surplus, if there were only 4 people in this market, would be $250. This person is so not in the market. So we're going to do what we did with demand, and we're going to think of a more realistic model where instead of there being 4 people, there are infinitely many. So we need to think about the seller that's willing to sell them for 20 and 30 and 40 and then 50 and 55, 60, all of these sellers put together are the total producer surplus in the market. So we'll be thinking about that triangle. So more than 4 producers, then we need to know the supply choke price. So if we're drawing the Ararat market more realistically, where we have supply, price, quantity, we've still got our P star of 250, which is the top of the triangle we're solving for. Right? No producer gets surplus that comes from above the price, because that price is the maximum they're taking in. That's the upper bound on their producer surplus. But they're getting surplus when that price is above their cost. And their cost is given to us by the supply company, because they enter the market and show up as a quantity supplied when the price rises above their cost of producing the good, their willingness to sell. Okay, so in order to calculate the area of that blue triangle, we need to know this point, the bottom point on the height. And a lot of times we would draw supply just starting at 0. And that's only true if there's a supplier out there who would give you this good for free. And that's definitely not always true. Although if I had these sneakers, I would give them to you for free. Sorry. But that point right there is a supply choke price. That's the minimum that the cheapest producer could supply these sneakers for. So maybe that's like something like the price of shipping plus some reasonable profit. The type of data that would help you look that up would be like the minimum starting bid on eBay. That would give you a good estimate of the lowest willingness to sell. And we also need to know Q star, equilibrium quantity of these sneakers being traded. And we said last time that was 10,000. So that means that triangle, calculate as 1/2 base times height. That triangle in blue of producer surplus will be 1/2 times the base of 10,000 times the height of 250 minus 20. That's how you calculate the height of that triangle. That is 5,000 times 230, which is $1,150,000. So for now, we're going to think of producer surplus as roughly equivalent to the profit that the sellers of the shoes, the shoe flippers, bring in. Notice it's a lot smaller than consumer surplus was, and think about the relationship that has to the shape of the curves, where the choke price is, etc. What that means for the slope. Okay, so I want you to, for your quiz, think about what eBay tells us and what it doesn't. So look up the Yeezy Ararat on eBay. Think about where we would see consumer and producer surplus in the data that we see on an eBay auction, and how the amount of information that we know about consumers' willingness to pay, producers' willingness to sell, is different in the buy now versus auction format. So let's look at this auction. You can do this good, or you can look up another good that you're interested in. So here's one for $650 or best offer. Ooh, P star appears to be much more than $250. $49.99 or best offer, $520 or best offer. I don't see any of these on an actual person's foot. $325, $136. What's wrong with these? It's just that they're size 7. Think about the information you see in these buy now offers. I don't see any of these that are auctions. So one way you can do that is you can select in your search results that you want to see auctions only. These are dead stock, 6 medium. They don't have any bids. Think about how this gives us a little bit of different information, especially if there were some bids. Let's think about just Yeezys. It's a little easier. only auctions. We've got some with some one bid there. These are attractive shoes. I'm not going to make fun of these shoes. When you can see bid data like this on eBay, think about what this is revealing to us. Starting price and then all these bids coming in. So I know you don't have the ability in your quizzes to talk a lot, which I apologize about. I'm trying to figure out if that's what I actually want from these video quizzes, but I think it's okay that they're forcing you to be maybe a little more concise than is optimal. It's annoying they don't show you how many words you have left, but just think a tiny bit about what eBay tells us about consumer and producer surplus, what the amount of information we get, how the amount of information we get is different depending on the type of auction. And then you're done with this video.